ways in which white racism adversely impacts the lives of black people. Just what are the ways that white racism can adversely impact the lives of black people as a group? What are some of those ways? I'm sorry? Power, but how is that defined specifically? Education, okay. I'm sorry? Economic employment. What else? Housing, what else? Policing. Why are we here today? Healthcare, okay. Now, we can actually kind of grow that list. Now we're going to move over to black racism. Tell me the ways in which black racism adversely impacts the lives of white people as an entire group. Thank you. The reason why you become silent, there's one that always comes up, and that's fear. White people are afraid of black people. They are afraid of us. And it's a very interesting thing, because black people know it. We know white people are afraid, but you have to start getting into the psychology. What are you afraid of?
The impact for us in Britain is that we weren't just enslaved, but we're also colonised as well. So it's really the psychology to say that we're not clever enough to govern our own country. Yeah? And so in the African Caribbean community, it's the double whammy as they're being enslaved and colonised, and also the trauma of the Mayafa, the African Holocaust. And I had a conversation with somebody about epigenetics to say that trauma can actually affect the actual DNA of people, and then it goes down the generations. But it's also that it fractured the spirits of black people at a crucial stage in their development, which means that further traumas that happen within the black community, you've already got a bit of a dent that it then goes in. So in some people, yes, it developed resilience, but in others, it's kind of like they've already fractured from slavery and colonisation, and then it just adds to it. And it was really a bit what was said in the video about black people being socialised to aspire to be more like the coloniser, yeah, and less like the colonised. So in your head as a black person, you're kind of like trying to advance and sometimes be not like yourself at the same time. So that's what adds to the psychological distress within the black community. And also there's a lack of unity amongst us in terms of lack of trust, which was fed to us by slavery and the slave master. We're often living in an alien and an oppressive culture, which causes more distress because you've not got protective spaces. So whereas in the American experience of after slavery you had segregation, you did have that sort of protective factors of black businesses, black communities. We've always got to go to our oppressors whenever we want anything. There's little finance within the black community if we want to do things for ourselves. Quite a lot of, like my parents came from Jamaica and they came over here with a 5-year plan and they were sending money back home. So they didn't have a plan of actually building anything within this community. Whereas people who went from Africa to America, they've got 300 years, 400 years of kind of finance within that community or presence within that community, which gives them some sort of basis to develop from. We've only got 70 years in large numbers in this country. And there's too much focus on where the slave ship dropped us off rather than where the slave ship picked us up, in terms of to say that we've all got that African commonality. We need to develop our own African-centred mental health services. There's a whole field of black psychology and African-centred psychology. You've got therapies that are developed from those perspectives, and they're the type of therapies that may be able to heal people when your Eurocentric therapies aren't effective. We need to build our own schools, not just supplementary schools, yeah, but teaching the greatness of who we were before we were slaves. Because that's some of what builds the resilience, that when you get your attacks on your sense of self, acts of microaggression, macroaggression, if you already know who you are, it doesn't matter who people tell you are because you know yourself. And that's some of what we're not getting, yeah, as resilience building, yeah, within our community. And I'll just read a quick excerpt because I'm aware of time. From this book. I've only just got it. It's called Dumbing Down, Reflections on the Miseducation of the Negro. And it says, perhaps it's because he felt the highly educated Negro was not able to contribute to the constructive development of the remainder of the race due to their thorough indoctrination into the belief system of the oppressor. This belief system would establish a dynamic which demands that the educated black look down upon and be ashamed of the masses of his close and distant relatives. Sadly, the highly educated is often educated away from, both mentally and physically, their true culture and no longer understand the needs of their people, but have grown to focus more on the needs of society as a whole. In other words, the needs of the dominant culture. In other words, the needs of whites. And then he goes on to say, Spike Lee offered a solution to this phenomenon in his not-so-celebrated joint entitled The Drop Squad. He directed a plot in which misled and miseducated Negroes were literally dropped. That is, they went through the process of deprogramming for the sake of the restoration of pride. The movie's sheroes and heroes were a band of doers who desired the correct to ills of dumbing down, psychological programming and miseducation by literally removing the bad seed from society. Once removed, the target would be ushered through a process designed to systematically erase the false beliefs and challenge the deleterious actions and replace them with notions of black power and black pride. The end result, or at least the one hoped for, was to systematically cleanse the mind and spirit of the African American community in order to produce individuals who contributed to the upliftment and empowerment of the race. Thank you.
I've looked at this from the perspective of the work that I do within the criminal justice and youth justice system. And for me, it's that overrepresentation of black people within the criminal and youth justice system. And a lot of it as well, what I've bore witness to, is about the perceptions of staff across the board. And when I say staff across the board, I'm talking about the magistrates to the judges, to the solicitors, to the legal advisors, to the ushers, yeah? And when I say the ushers, I remember one time when I was on court duty and a young person was waiting in the foyer for court and everything else. I always ask young people, I don't presume, I always ask, why are you here? And this particular young person I'd already spoken to, and I knew that that young person was a witness, yeah? The usher came in to me and she went, Joan, you know that young person out there is not for you. And I said, what do you mean? And she says, I thought he was, you know, a defendant. And I said, well, I already knew he wasn't a defendant because I asked. And this is the difficulty that we're faced with a lot of the times in terms of the perception that obviously if a young person is black and at court, they automatically must be there as a defendant, yeah? That also goes through in terms of the way that young people are treated as well. And not just young people, adults as well, because as it was highlighted before, I did previously work under the Black Prisoner Support Project many moons ago under POPs. And within the prison system itself, that is a completely different ballgame. And in terms of people's attitudes and perceptions is that, you know, what have you got the Black Prisoner Support Project for? They don't need it. They've got same rights and same access to everything else. And when you raise the fact that, no, hang on a minute, the system is built up from a white perspective, not from a black perspective. There was loads of campaigns and fights that had to take place in order for black prisoners to be able to have access to things that was pertinent to their personal daily upkeep and hygiene and everything else, such as the appropriate combs, the appropriate creams, and that type of thing. And some of the responses we'd get was, we have curry once a week, please, yeah? I won't take that any further on that one. So it's that complete ignorance of the not acknowledging where the system is set up. And the pushback, as Joy kind of puts up in her presentation, I experienced that for the same things that I've already highlighted. What do you need that for? Well, what about the white prisoners then? Well, hang on a minute, the system's already set up for white people, yeah? And it's this kind of dialogue that has to take place, that needs to carry on. We need to kind of review and look at where we can put ourselves in positions to actually affect change. Well, I remember many years ago we invited Gus John to the youth offending service with a view to him helping us create a programme that would be, because I remember when I did work in probation, there used to be a programme for the people who was on programmes, and there used to be a programme whereby if you was black, you did a specific cultural programme before you actually went on to do the actual offender programme, yeah? And we wanted something similar along those lines within the youth offending service. Gus John came, he was ace, he was absolutely brilliant. The pushback again was from some of our colleagues, well, does he know about risk? Does he know about this? Does he know? He didn't need to know about that. We're the professionals within that field who know that element. Bring the person in, enable the person to help us develop those kind of programs, to help our young people, to help the adults within those respective, because I'm sure you must be aware that within the youth justice and criminal justice system, it's not an easy life, and prison is a total different ballgame. So too is the youth offending institutions, the secure training centres and the secure children's homes for the younger people. So for me, it's those where we need to, as a community, look at exploring the people such as the Gus Johns who are available. Because one of the things that I find quite surprising, and it was highlighted at that last session that we was at in terms of the Black History Store, is we're not always aware of the skill sets that we have within our community, and we need to tap into that. We not only need to tap into it, we need to look at how we can utilise that to all of our advantage.
I would say that post-traumatic slave syndrome is still prevalent and it's evident today. Even in the things that we use as coping mechanisms from religion. If you look at when I was working in the prisons and I asked my fellow black men why they went to a particular religion, it was usually due to acceptance and wanting to be accepted, and also a coping mechanism. However, what you found as well is that it was also a way of getting away from the things that they deemed as being negatively black. So it is still relevant today. Yeah, the amount of weight that's on the black female's head and psychology is tremendous and is overlooked. So not only do they have to bear the everyday pressures of life, they also have to bear the everyday expectations that people are constantly bombarding them, saying that they've failed all the time. So when I was in KEDG, Comedic Education Guidance, we had a module called From Psychology to Black Psychology, African Psychology, which looked at that. It looked at those various aspects. And I really think that with black men, especially working in the prisons, they have a coping mechanism, which is to work out. So if you understand that is a stress relief, think of what the African woman has to go through with no stress outlet other than just to get on with it. One of the things that I'm constantly finding nowadays is that black men who don't know any better, and black women as well, are constantly putting black men and black women down, always constantly putting black women down. But to do that, if you're doing that, putting people down who are suffering from a psychosis, then you yourself are sick. You're mentally ill. Because no one would do that if you knew that the person, I mean, if you went to a hospital and a person was sick, would you constantly put them down for being sick? But that's what we do. We think we're helping, but we're making it worse. Actually making it worse. And what we need to do is have a different approach, because obviously over the years this approach has not worked. And if keep doing something over and over again is insanity. The unique issues actually start by the fact that they're not unique. We think they're unique, but they're not actually unique. We've been told about this individualism that affects only a certain demographic within the African diaspora, when really and truly, that's not the case. What we have to do is look at it from a holistic point of view and look at the issue there. So we're talking about psychology, we're talking about economics, we're talking about nutrition and health and fitness, and we're talking about family structure. So you're being hit from every single angle and expected to cope. It's like being an octopus and having all your tentacles being pulled at the same time. And one's going to have to give. And then when one of your angles is pulled off, we're the first one to actually say, see, the person couldn't cope. My dad told me this ages ago. He says that what people do is that they have a lot of baggage. And they'll say, come and take me on with my baggage. And you'll have sympathy and you think, yeah, I can deal with this. And then what happens is that when you buckle underneath the strain, what happens is you get blamed saying, see, I knew you couldn't manage me. I knew you couldn't carry me. I knew you couldn't help me. And this is, again, another form of psychosis where we become self-degrading victim blamers. And what we need is a different approach. It's not working. One of the approaches that I think is that we really, really need to go over and over and over again and stop this psychosis repeating. One of the things that, I mean, it's going to get a lot of people, it might rub your sleeves a bit, but one of the main things what black people have in post-traumatic slave syndrome is the very religions that they embrace for coping mechanism actually promote it. Yeah. I mean, I was like, say, 12 years old when I realized that the Bible is actually promoting and justifying the treatment of enslavement. And we become so picky and wishy-washy and don't look at it for how it is. Also, the way we taught to read things is in a way to bamboozle you. So I think very logical, and I'm scientific in my thinking. So someone would open a Bible or the Quran and say, you see this part here, you don't understand it. And then they'll say, but then they'll flip the book, go 2, 3, 4 different books and say, here's their answer here. And I'll say, yeah, but that means these people here had to wait 3, 4, 500 years to get this answer. That's not right. We need to be taught how to think critically and logically. That's a real-time solution.
My personal experience where my younger brother was diagnosed with paranoia and the whole the components that led to it. I think Martel touched on a very good point about religion, because my mother was extremely religious, and there was an element of self-hate. She never really told us growing up that she loved us, and she never really expressed the feelings. She kept things bottled in, and I think that kind of spiraled to my brother, because he was very academically, he was very, very clever. He was studying law, and I think he set himself such high standards and all the pressures that kind of affected him in terms of the social side and even economic. It kind of just got to a point where he just had enough. And I got a call. I don't know what I was doing. I can't remember what I was doing. And my mother said, "You've got to come to the hospital quick." And I was like, "Right, why?" Because your brother's in there. And as I got there, he was in like a small room. It was no bigger than a toilet. He was heavily sedated. He was rambling and he was saying all kinds of things, and it was just a horrible experience. And one of the things that kind of hit home is the security guard that was there. He was an African brother, and he pulled us to one side and he says, "Under no circumstances, do not let these people take your brother, because if they take him, that's going to be it." So with that being said, we managed to get him home. But even the process of him being at home, he was literally under house arrest because he couldn't go out. 1 minute he'll be just sat down, just out of it, and then the next minute he'll just become violent. And he was really violent to the point where he wasn't violent towards people, but he was destroying things in the house. As well as that, he started stealing as well. But I think with all that happening, there was an element of helplessness, and just having the practitioners come in and asking him these questions whilst he was sedated, they weren't really getting the real him, you know what I mean? So it was almost like a justification for them to say, well, he needs to be institutionalised. And he did eventually, because my mum just couldn't cope. She got to a point where she said, "You know what, Lawrence, I can't deal with it." it was just emotionally and, you know, mentally draining. The most poignant thing going through that experience is going to the, because he was at North Manchester Hospital for, I think it was 2 weeks at the time, and seeing him there, and he was totally a different person. And it was at that point where I vowed to myself, I'm not going to allow the institution to take me away from the family. You know, we pulled together, and I think because of that, it kind of prevented him from being there permanently. I think the biggest thing for me was the religion, because my mum kept on banging about religion and quoting the Bible, and I was like, we don't need to hear that. It's about how we get our brother out of this state, and showing the love and the appreciation, because I think that was the main thing that got him out there, the love. You know what I mean? The love that we had for him, irrespective of, you know, religion and stuff like that. It was that point that kind of got him out of the situation that he was in. I think there's got to be an education amongst everyone, particularly of people of colour, about the effects of being in the environment that we're in, and that how that can affect how we deal with different situations, i.e. the mental health, which is kind of, it's almost like a taboo. To this day, not a lot of our people in our family know what happened to my brother, and it's kind of breaking that cycle and having the confidence to say, you know what, there is a problem and we need to address it, and not to let ego and pride get in the way with it, because it could be damaging. So I think it's that awareness that is important.
So it's education, breaking the taboo, showing that love and appreciation, and being open. Yeah. Because just quickly going back to your point, I'll tell you the same joke. It's not unique. Every human being, you know, goes through difficult times, black or white, and it's recognising that it's not unique. Yeah, you have unique challenges. Yeah. But if somebody is going to break, then somebody's going to break regardless of colour. So I think that's what you're saying. Okay, so what we'll do is at this point now, we'll open up the floor for Q&A.
Watching Dr. Joy DeGroy, it might seem obvious to everyone else, but like seeing the pictures of the lynchings, I'm normally like just really like taken aback by the lynchings, and I've never taken a moment to look at the faces in the background and the white people in the background. So I thought that was really interesting. And I felt like her language when she was speaking about people being robbed of their humanity, I liked the fact that she said about the little white girl, our children. I've never heard a black professional, pro-black, sort of speak about everyone in that sense before, as we're one. And I'm just wondering whether in your profession or in Jones, is there any dialogue between white professionals in law and within psychology that you have in these conversations? Because in my experience, we all come and meet together. We have our black huddle. White people have their white huddle. I'm just wondering, where is the dialogues? Because I think we're there now where we can confidently speak about these issues, our oppression. Are those conversations happening? Are they receptive to them? Because it's really from us to educate them about what's going on with us. And I'll direct that to you.
Yeah. It's a really good point that you've mentioned. My interpretation of coming from an African-centred perspective is that we can't expect the hand that pushes into the ghetto to take us out of the ghetto. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if it's going to be the onus is on me to explain to well-meaning white people about how to help black people and expect them to help us, we're going to be waiting a long time. And also, I'm wondering, what's in it for them? There may well be an incentive for them to help us survive, but I don't know what the incentive is to help us thrive. And what I'm wondering is whether we've come to a time when we need to do it for ourselves, really. And if they want to help us, that is good, but we've got our own things going on that we're helping ourselves. So what I'm expecting to be able to come out of T.A.P and other organisations like this is that, you know, we are lobbying black professionals to be, when they're lecturing, putting in black psychology or African-centred psychology into the lectures that they're doing, or to get modules on African-centred psychology. So it's not just Eurocentric psychology people learn about when they go to university to do a psychology course. So it's about, we've got to do it for ourselves, and if we can't do it within the spaces of the university or the formal health system, we've got to do it for ourselves. So it's like the...
My point wasn't that speaking to them to get them to help us. It was just basically what I said, which was the dialogue. Is there any conversations at all? Because I feel like it's just counterproductive for us to always be talking within ourselves as if we don't live in a world where everyone else exists. And I think that we are there now.
I think when you say are there any conversations, do you mean are there any positive progression conversations that moves on?
And what's the response?
Because there probably are many conversations, case in point, what Joan was saying.
Yeah. Within our office, we have numerous conversations in that kind of context. Some of it is sometimes off of personal experience that we've had ourselves or with the young people that we're working with. For me, I raised a point in terms of my own experiences of the racism I experienced as a child, yeah? And also in terms of the negative images that are out there in terms of black people when I was growing up and everything else. And automatically, one of my white colleagues responded with, load of crap that, Joan, that's not true.
Yeah.
I countered that and said, you can't tell me what my experiences are, yeah? And then furthered that with, we are working with young people that come from all different heritage backgrounds, yeah? You cannot sit there and say that, you know, just completely negate my experience because it doesn't fit into where your thinking is. That expanded into a huge conversation in the office. But interestingly, what I said to Brian as well was, because it mixed of black colleagues and white colleagues speaking and everything else, that particular colleague didn't take on board what I was saying until it was endorsed by another white colleague. Yeah? Yes. So for me, no matter where I am, whether I'm in the office, when I'm in court, when I'm in the cells, I challenge accordingly. There was a time whereby a solicitor who was representing a young person that was in the cells, yeah? She come out, she says to me, Joan, I don't know what's wrong with him. He should just go guilty. You know, the victims pointed him out. He's got, what did you say? He's got dreadlocks. So I looked at her and I went, we had a minute. I said, I'm sorry. He had cane rolls, yeah? I said, who are you talking about? Which one? So she said, so I said, he hasn't got dreadlocks. Yeah, he has. Please don't tell me that you genuinely think he's got dreadlocks. Goes upstairs in the courtroom. Magistrate's not there, it's just myself, prosecutor, another colleague from the OS, defence solicitor comes in. Prosecutor's going, yeah, Joan, I believe. He's got dreadlocks, Yeah, it's dreadlocks. So I says, oh my dear goodness. Challenge. Then the prosecutor says to me, to be fair, when I think about dreadlocks, I think about Bob Marley. I went, oh, blank canvas in your head. Picture Bob Marley right now. Look at that picture and tell me they're dreadlocks. Oh, actually, yeah, Joan,
so
you're
it's about
right.
using common sense when you're having the discussion.
Absolutely. Wow.
Yeah, I think a massive issue is the fact that here in this country we don't know who we are. In this particular country and our history. The history in this country. You know what I mean? We always look to the US. Or you always look to the big continent. Or you always look to the Caribbean. But the problems in which we face here, we don't know who we are. Like I sometimes work in schools and they don't know nothing about 1981, Brixton riots, Toxteth, Handsworth, Mossad, they don't have a clue. Do you know what I'm saying? What I'm saying is that if you know, this is part of our kind of, that was our civil rights kind of era. You know what I mean? Our rising up. And they haven't got a clue with regards to that.
So, can I take that further, would you? Are you then saying that, even though I think you were saying that, Brian, that, you know, we keep having these talks, and I think I was saying we keep having these discussions, but part of the reason why we keep doing it is to find out who we are amongst people who will understand and want to. Is that what you're saying? Kind of, yeah, and the fact that it's quite complex as well. It's not as clear cut as the US situation. You know what I mean? It's not as clear cut as the Caribbean situation with regards to colonialism and everything else, and with the fact that there's so many different communities here as well. You have their own unique experiences. So say for instance the new communities that are coming now, you know, whether they be from, you know what I mean, Uganda, whether they be from Rwanda, you know what I mean, whether they be from Somalia, they have their own unique experiences which are different from the experiences of people who came over in the Windrush era. Do you know what I'm saying? And this is what I'm saying, it's quite complex, it's more complex than it was maybe 35 years ago. Do you know what I'm saying? So are we then saying in terms of going back to our real-time solutions, are we then saying that we need to be open to having more collective discussion and positive discourse and not get so tired? Because obviously there's a difference between just chatting and there's a difference between what Martel was saying about being critical thinkers and analysing. So are you saying it's about having more discussions where we are critically thinking about our situation?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and the fact that it's consistently changed. Yeah, and consistently changing. It's different now from it was in 1981.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? You know, the different communities and everything else. With regards to moving forward, I think it goes, and with regards to the religious situation, I think it goes back to kind of health, really. Do you know what I mean? That's the basis of everything with regards to what you're putting in your mouth.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? And exercise, you know what I mean? Without that, then you're nothing.
Yes.
The background I'm coming from is mental health. I run a company, we like create solutions for mainly
What's your
business.
company called? Shameless plug.
Yeah, that's right, it's called Gift Help. It's not really a public thing, so we don't give direct access to care to people. We work with companies to help better their service, their healthcare service.
Right.
So at the moment we work with Sussex Cricket, County Cricket Club. We're also working with a big black church, which is where I'm going to kind of go back to. Because obviously the kind of sense of religion in this room is that it's a coping mechanism, which is interesting because within the church that I'm working with, which is predominantly black, the attitude to mental health is almost worrying. I think that a lot of them, they accept that it's there sometimes. I don't know whether that comes from being black or being religious. Either way, they don't kind of, there's a stigma there. But what they do say is, they say, oh, just pray about it. They believe in the spiritual that kind of overrides the actual, the facts basically. So what I wanted to say as well is that this whole African-centred approach to mental health, while it's needed, obviously, but I think what's good to remember is that post-traumatic slave disorder is post-traumatic stress disorder in a different format almost. So the kind of side effects are the same. What you see is the same, but for different reasons. So while we have to talk to ourselves, like internalise the problem, there's also nothing wrong in getting help. But it's more experience, because people have been working on this for years psychologically, so you can't ignore the facts and try and do it all internally. We need to take the research that's there and then apply it to our unique situation, if you know what I mean.
I kind of wanted to respond to you a little bit where you said if the environment doesn't change, nothing's going to change. Because I'm training to be a psychotherapist, and I get that it can be very Eurocentric, and hopefully I'll go on to do something more African-centered. But I think that, I don't know that I agree that we need lots of externalized discussion with other people. I don't need necessarily my oppressor to understand me. I think what frustrates me is that I'm volunteering with an organisation that hardly has any clients, and yet that client group is overrepresented in the mental health system. And then there's lots of talk about us, we're fragmented, and I think we have to and lots of us are not awake, I think. And we have to acknowledge that we are broken, we are damaged. There's transgenerational hurt. Whatever happened to my forefathers and mothers, maybe I'm sensitive enough to be carrying that, or maybe one of my siblings is carrying that, but we are hurt, and we have to accept it, because there's always that, you've got to be a strong black woman, and black people are strong, and we internalize all this hatred of ourselves. There's a term called misogynoir, which is specifically a hatred of black women, and she mentioned the rap videos and things, because you can't be just too black, And I just think if we could just have the discussion more internalized. Why does my oppressor need to understand me? Why can't we understand that we are broken, and it's okay to accept that we are broken? It doesn't make me less. And from my place of brokenness, from Lawrence, he said when they came together and they showed that love, so when they could overcome the self-hatred that they have internalized from society, from the generations, transgenerationally, then they could give it to each other, and his brother could heal and be liberated.